It's fair to say that Australians love their chicken. So much so that on average we each eat nearly 50 kilos of it every year. I know I'm used to seeing it on the shelf, but when it comes to how it's farmed, well, I don't know a whole lot about it. We've been invited by the RSPCA to head out and take a look at both free-range and barn-raised meat chicken farms to learn for ourselves about what it takes to provide a high quality, high welfare and sustainable chicken for Aussies. First up on our list, we're meeting the team from Inghams at one of their properties about an hour north of Brisbane on Gubbi Gubbi country.
We're here with you, Andrew, and the team at Inghams to come and have a look at what chicken farming looks like. We see the chook on the shelf, but we don't actually know kind of what goes on behind it. What's important to you guys?
I think for me is to actually show how we do it. There's a lot of misconceptions about chicken farming, and I'm quite proud to actually show today how we farm our chickens, because I, as a vet, love animals and would always want to look after animals. And so I'm actually quite happy to show you how we farm chickens today and hopefully correct some of those things that are out there that are incorrect.
And so, are there hormones used in chickens?
Absolutely no hormones used in chickens, no added hormones used. Obviously chickens have physiological hormones,
Yep.
as do we, but no added hormones used in chicken production at all.
With the rain getting heavier, it was time to get our overalls on and see what was inside the sheds.
We're in our overalls now, and we've got our boots on that are designated to the farm. And before we go in, part of our biosecurity or disease prevention procedures is we dip our feet in a disinfectant foot dip. We'll wash our hands, we're all used to it now with COVID, but we'll put some hand sanitizer on before we go in the shed. And that's just to minimise the risk of any transmission of disease from us to the birds.
When I first walked in, it was pretty confronting. In each shed they farm about 40,000 birds, and it's up to a team of people to look after them throughout their lives. Meet Vay. He's the manager here, so let's hear about what he gets up to.
My role on the farm is to be the responsible person from A to Z. This is all my kids. So we feed them, we grow them, we make sure they're healthy. If there's something wrong, we fix it.
So how many birds have we got in the shed here?
We're starting with about 40,000 birds. After 14 days, they'll have the whole shed. After about 30 days, the shed will basically be full, density-wise, and then we schedule pickup through the company. That picks up about half of the birds. That specific birds around about the 2 kilogram mark. We send them out to Woolies and Coles, and that might be your barbecue birds that you receive. Like you can see here now, we're in a stage about 43 days where they're quite comfortable. The density is comfortable for them. They can scratch, lift quite easily. And then around about 49 days, we produce 2.8 to a 3 kilogram bird, and then they'll come and pick the rest up.
The chickens have always got access to food and water.
Correct, yes. To have 10 birds in your backyard, you feed them twice, maybe 3 times a day. To have 40,000 birds, you've got to have really intensive care for them.
As we moved through the shed, I could appreciate that they did have space to move. Looking at each bird individually, they looked content. However, I don't really know what's healthy and what's not. With Andrew's background as a vet, I was keen to hear and see how we know when a bird is happy and healthy.
Is there a risk that as they grow too quickly that their muscles don't actually grow enough to be able to hold them up?
The reality is, with a population of this size, you will get some birds that might develop some leg issues, and that's why we have the daily inspections, that if they have any issues, that they have any sort of problem or health problem that means they can't access feed and water, then we will humanely euthanize them. But it's a very, very low proportion of the flock. So yeah, that you'll see in the media about broiler leg strength and foot pad lesions, but we've got a lot of quality checks to make sure that we give them the best life that we can and mitigate the risk of those sorts of issues from happening, together with the genetics companies looking after the genetic potential for us as well.
I think in terms of what I was expecting, it's like I thought it was going to be very intense, and it is, but I'm also like surprised with how quiet they are. But I think in terms of like they're happy and they're moving and they seem pretty chilled out, really. It is certainly gets you thinking, but I think that's probably like thinking in a really good way of this is what consumers want. They want food that's affordable and consistent, and that's what the retailers want, and it kind of all flows back into what's happening on farm. And I think as the farmers and the other guys are saying. Like it's about making sure the animals are happy and healthy, and as far as I can see and trust the vets, I think they're doing it. So
It really got me thinking about the complexity that comes with food. On this site, they have 8 sheds, all fed automatically. Their water is processed to a level suitable for human consumption. And for the birds' welfare, it's important to keep a temperature that they would naturally feel. And the most effective way to do that is through technology.
So we call this a climate computer. This controls your temperature and humidity, the amount of airflow that we have over the birds. The bigger the birds are becoming, the more active they become, the more heat they generate. In the past, they used to rely on much less density, so they had less room for disastrous errors. You nearly had to sleep in the shed. All this computer does is to make it easier for us, and that's what technology is about.
Thankfully, Vay doesn't need to sleep in the shed these days. We know consumers care about animal welfare, and they still want their products at a reasonable price. So we wanted to find out from Sheridan how Inghams achieve high animal welfare across their farms.
All of our farms are RSPCA approved, so we had quite an early relationship with RSPCA and were quite early to adopt the scheme. In those initial stages, we had the list of standards from RSPCA, and we worked through those to make sure that all of our farms were compliant with those standards. We have a compliance team who would do sort of gap audits, and then after that we'd have the assessors come out to the farms, and in the first year they assess the farms 4 times in that first year, and then once a farm's onto the scheme, then it's usually twice a year after that, both unannounced and announced audits.
yeah, okay. So they could just turn up one day and we're here to have a look.
Yep, with a short amount of notice, yep.
Why is it important for the consumers and the customers of Inghams to be able to have these on-farm assurance systems?
Yes, I think RSPCA is just a really trusted, well-known, well-recognised name, synonymous with, higher animal welfare standards. So for consumers, I think they see that logo and they have that trust that, what happens on a farm would meet their expectations for higher welfare. We know that our customers care about welfare and that welfare is important to them, and putting that RSPCA logo there just means that they can have that confidence that we're raising our chickens according to those higher welfare standards.
Why does RSPCA Approved exist?
We recognise that the law doesn't go far enough. We're here to try to push that incremental change, get our foot in the door with producers to try to improve the lives of as many animals as possible today. The standards are achievable for commercial production, but are still better than the law.
So you're trying to lift what best practice is?
Yeah, we're trying to raise the bar for the millions of chickens that are slaughtered each year.
So for you guys, do you see more demand coming from it from the farm side or more from the food side of the end product?
Both, actually. We get quite a few requests from all different kinds of farmers, ones that are already doing really good stuff in high welfare, and even ones that they just actually want to improve and know what to do next.
As we look through the sheds, what are some of the key things that show that this is an RSPCA farm?
The litter, and you would have seen today, the litter was really dry, friable, good quality. And that's something that's really important to us because that's what the birds are in contact with the majority of the day. That light intensity, so actually having it at a good brightness during the day to actually encourage birds to be active and to move around, but then actually at night time to make sure it's proper darkness for a good period of time so they get that period of rest. For
someone at home who's buying a chicken, why should they look for RSPCA Approved on the shelf?
Well, I think all of us want to know that when we buy an animal product, they've had a good life and they've been raised to a higher welfare standard and someone's checked that. And if you look for that logo, you can be guaranteed there's good higher welfare standard that's been met and it's been assessed and certified by the RSPCA.
It was obvious to see the influence that RSPCA Approved has on this farm, although I still had a burning question.
Why do we farm inside in an intensive way like this in Australia?
When you think about all the things that chicken meat is trying to do to achieve protein for the consumer, we need to consider things like sustainability, we need to consider affordability, we need to consider welfare, and basically the way that we're farming, as you've seen today, is probably the best way that we can try and best meet all of those needs. So we're providing an optimum environment for the chickens, as you've seen with all our ventilation and temperatures and sensors and everything that we do. We're giving them optimum nutrition. They're great genetics selected well for robustness and for health. So in doing that, we can supply an affordable protein that's sustainable, low emissions per kilo for a land-based protein. We can do it in a welfare-friendly way, accredited by organisations like RSPCA Approved, and we can produce a quality product in the volumes that are required for our major customers. So how we do it in this way is the best way to meet all of those requirements that really the general consumer and the public that's buying our product, I think, would want.
Of course, the rain has decided to stop as we're about to leave the farm. Walking to that shed initially and seeing just how many birds there are, like it blows your mind away. 40,000 birds in that area, but you can't actually really comprehend just how big the area is in the shed. I think getting a bit of an understanding of the process behind not just growing the chickens, but also the importance of the RSPCA scheme to make sure that these animals, over their lifetime, they're happy, they're healthy, they're looked after. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the consumer can look at the product that they're looking at and go, yes, this system does exist, but it's done in the best interest of the animal first, to make sure that consumers here in Australia can get access to chicken that is affordable, that has been raised with animal welfare front of mind. And so I think today's just been incredibly thought-provoking and has blown me away.
While both Ingham and Baiada have free-range and barn-raised systems, for biosecurity reasons, we needed to take a couple of weeks away. After we'd done that, we headed to see Olympic Farms, north of Sydney, home to a new slow-growing breed of bird.
So I've had a few different questions playing on my mind since we visited the last farm. I'm really keen to understand what are some of the similarities and the differences here, and how much say does the Australian consumer have in the types of farming that happens?
I'm Daniel Blakemore, run an Olympic farm. I'm the manager here. We're about 80 k's north of Sydney, and we're a free-range chicken farm.
4 sheds that we can see from the outside. How many chickens have you got in the sheds?
About 14,000 in each shed, and they come at different stages. So our 2 older sheds are 35 days old, and our 2 younger sheds are 29 days old.
So Dan, for you, you're a bit of an early riser.
Yeah, mate.
You managed to beat us out of bed this morning. What does a day look like for you, and what time does your day actually start?
Yeah, so I get up about 5:30. I'm down here around 6:15, start opening up the range doors, letting the birds out. From then on, it doesn't stop really. I'm in the sheds doing the litter or making sure the feed and waters are all good, make sure the birds are happy.
So it is quite manual. We've seen you winding up the doors for the birds to come out. Why are you guys doing that, and why is it important?
Yeah, so if it's too hot, the birds get distressed and start beaking, which therefore we lose more birds to heat exhaustion. And if it's too cold, they'll lose weight and they're just not a happy bird.
Is a lot of that done off your expertise and actually having grown up around chicken farming?
Yeah, that's right. As soon as you walk into a shed, they'll tell you exactly what's going on. And you'll see them huddling up in a balls all together, well then they're too cold. If they're all spread out and they're baking, well then you know they're too hot. Something has to be done.
You've worked in a few different chicken sheds over your life, but what is it about free-range chickens that you enjoy coming to work every day?
For one, we get less density, so each shed has roughly 14,000 in them. And being free range, they get outside, they get to do what normal chickens do. They get to frolic around, they get to eat bugs, they get to be in the sun, which is therefore they're getting more vitamins and stuff like that. And they just seem to be a much more happy bird.
And what does that mean for you as well? The birds are happier. What's it like for you?
It means I'm happier.
Happy bird, happy person.
That's right.
It was clear that animal welfare was equally as important on both free-range and barn-raised farms. Janine works for Baiada, one of the largest chicken producers in Australia, and her job is to manage animal welfare across their entire business.
And so for Baiada, why is animal welfare important?
It's a very core principle for our consumers, but it's also a very significant principle for every single one of our staff. We know that an animal that has been raised under the right conditions and in the right environment is also going to be an animal that is going to be more productive. And it makes us proud to be able to produce animals that are in good welfare, but at the same time that are productive. I think it speaks really well of every company that is willing to have a person whose main role is just to look after the welfare of the birds.
Now you may have noticed that these chickens look somewhat different to the barn-raised animals we saw before. It's got nothing to do with the fact that they're free range, but purely that these are the Hubbard birds. They're a new variety of chicken to Australia. They grow 30% slower, and it takes them about 60 days to reach their final weight.
What have been some of the drivers of bringing these birds into Australia?
Well, it's market demand. Like Baiada needed to explore the potential of using a slow-growing breed. It was a big commitment, a big investment for Baiada to do that.
And for the everyday consumer, why is the slower growing chickens important to them?
The slow-growing is just another genetic breed. The body composition tends to be a little bit more slimmer, more upright. A lot of it is perception of what they consider to be a better welfare, which isn't necessarily so. There is also the perception that it has a different taste. These birds can be a little bit more dark meat.
They have access to food the whole time, so why are these ones growing slower than the other birds that we've seen?
So that's purely genetics. They have the same access to the feed, same composition of feed. They would have the same appetite, but their ability to convert that into meat is differently to our other genetic breeds that we have in Australia. So really it's just their potential to convert the protein in their diets.
You've taken us on a little bit of a road trip over a couple of weeks with a little biosecurity gap in between. Yep. What's been the purpose of you taking us to see these different farms?
Well, I guess the last 10 years in particular, we've worked quite closely with the meat chicken industry. It's really important for us to show how the majority of meat chickens are farmed in Australia today, the fact that they have really good animal welfare outcomes by meeting our standard, and yeah, the different types of production systems we have.
And so what are some of the similarities and differences between the two?
I guess similarities wise, all the birds are farmed indoors for the majority of their life, and even though they have access to the outdoors now, they only are given access to the outdoors once they have their full adult feathers. So in terms of indoor production and free range, they still spend the majority of the time inside the shed. So it's actually really important to make sure that those inside conditions are good. So obviously the difference is, at some point in their life, they get to come outside, or they have the choice to. Not everyone's obviously coming outside today, but those that are brave enough to venture out are coming outside. Whether you're buying indoor RSPCA approved, free range RSPCA approved, slower growing RSPCA approved, the animal welfare sort of component's been taken care of.
And so when it comes to some of the drivers, what do you guys see as the drivers for the different types of farming, even under the RSPCA banner?
Consumers obviously is a big driver, but then we're also seeing these other pressures from investors, other companies. You know, everyone wants to see each other doing better in the future. People probably need to accept that it may not ever be entirely free range. You know, there are risks to being entirely free range, biosecurity, avian influenza, but if we're also to still feed 25+ million people sustainably, then indoor production with meat chickens is still going to continue in the future. The important part is obviously ensuring that the meat chickens' welfare is paramount to all of that, and that's, I guess, the role that RSPCA takes in working with the meat chicken industry.
In Australia, 690 million meat chickens are reared each year. Whether they're free range, barn raised, traditional or slow grown varieties, they each have their benefits and challenges. One company who know all too well about choice is Coles and the role of the consumer in this industry.
Well, Lauren, we've spent the last few days on a couple of different farms. We've looked at barn raised and free range chickens, and now it's actually really cool to be in the supermarket with you guys here in Coles in Melbourne. At the consumer end, what are some of the drivers of consumer choice?
Yeah, so foremost, price and quality are the main drivers. When customers come to shelf, they've got a lot of things on their mind. If they're especially price conscious, they might look at that entry-level product. If they have a preference for free range, then we have that offering as well. And slow grown has a unique taste profile.
How important is it to give consumers choice?
Really important. Everyone has different taste preferences. They might have a preference of free range over conventional indoor. And everyone's got different price points that they're willing to pay for. So that's what we aim to do, is offer that range of options so that customers can make their own choices when they come into store.
When it comes to the different products on the shelf, is it the consumers deciding, or are you guys telling them what products they can have?
It's definitely the consumer. We are 100% consumer-led. We are constantly asking our customers about our products, about what they like, about what they don't like. Our customers always tell us that they care about animal welfare and they want to see more welfare standards and more simple visual cues like RSPCA. And I think the RSPCA is great in the sense that they are constantly reviewing their standards.
You guys sit in a really interesting spot when it comes to, you've got the consumers buying the products, but you're also sourcing and working with farmers really closely. So What's the importance of everyone along that supply chain listening to each other and actually being involved in the conversations?
If we don't listen to the customer, they ultimately vote with their feet. So those ramifications are felt all the way up the supply chain. But on the flip side, we still need to produce that food. It is 100% working together, considering the insights and those drivers from the customers, but also what is possible with our farmers, with our suppliers.
Well, it's been really fascinating learning about the meat chicken industry over the past few weeks. What has stood out to me is the importance of different farming systems to ensure that we can sustainably support a growing consumer base. Whether it's a consumer looking for barn-raised or free-range, traditional or slow-growing, it's important that consumers have choice, and it's really opened my eyes to the importance of affordable protein for consumers. What drives that choice? Well, that's different between various groups of people, and one that we know that consumers are demanding continues to improve is ensuring that animals have a good quality of life. Thank you to the RSPCA Approved Farming Scheme for taking us from the farm to the supermarket shelf so we could learn more about higher animal welfare in Aussie poultry.